Murray, thank you for joining me on the podcast. This has been one that's taken a few months to get together. Yeah. But after we first met and I had that conversation with you at the Surf Lifesaving Club, the Surf Lifesaving Club, I thought this subject is one that we 100% should be having, because I don't think this topic of masculinity in sport and then going into mental health in sport, but mainly around masculinity is spoken enough. In any game, any sport, any sporting environment, and I think it's a super interesting topic, and your research is incredible. So thank you for joining me. Thanks for doing this. Thanks for setting this up. But I think it'd be good to give a little bit of background into your experiences in sport, where perhaps all this research and the idea of it came about, and start wherever you want to start and where sport started for you.
Okay. Well, I was, as a kid, I was heavily involved in both Australian football, AFL, and cricket. Arguably, I was probably a bit better at football than I was at cricket, and yet I found myself sort of going from an under-10 ruckman to an under-12 centre player to an under-14 rover to an under-16 sort of bits and pieces, sort of forward pocket player, because I grew early, and then all the other kids started to grow, a lot later. And in that time, I think I got knocked out about 4 or 5 times in 1 year. And my dad said, and by this stage I was playing cricket as well, very high level cricket. I was playing district cricket with Paran in Victoria. That's where I grew up, in Victoria. And sort of my dad just said, look, as much as you love football, he said, it's a bit of a mugs game when you just keep getting knocked out. And I tended to agree, because at that stage I was playing under 15s on a Sunday, under 16s on the Saturday morning, and seconds in the afternoon with the men. And again, it was country footy, and they didn't really care too much about kids. If you played, you were a man, and you got hit just the same as any other bloke, so they didn't really look out for you or anything. So off I went to pursue cricket, which is what I did. I was sort of talent scouted by some people at Paran, one of them being Dav Watmore, who was he was playing with Australia at the time, and he was coaching Paran. So off I went to play with them, and played with them for probably 4 or 5 years, from about 14, and training about 4 or 5 hours a day. At that stage, I did really love cricket. I absolutely adored it. It was my passion. It was what I did. But it just all started to become a bit too much. After year 12, I started to lose that passion that a lot of people do with sport. I started doing some running, which I'd never done before. I think I did my first marathon without any training, and I did a 3:03 marathon.
Wow, no training?
Virtually no training.
That's off the back of like footy fitness and...
Yeah, and cricket and whatever.
Good time to begin with.
I think the longest run I'd ever done was 20k. So I remember hitting the 30k mark and thinking, this wasn't a great idea.
This is the furthest I've gone.
No, that's right. And then I joined a running club, and then all the other people in the running club said, how good you were, and blah, 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 blah. And so all of a sudden you start thinking, you start thinking of alternatives. And I was still playing cricket at that time, and I'd had a really good week. I think I scored 70-something one week. Came out the following week, and it was only a practice game. Came out the following week and still felt like I was in form, and I remember it was about the second or third ball that I faced, and it was a relatively short ball, probably not short enough to pull, but I tried to pull it anyway because I thought I was seeing them like a football, and got a top edge and crushed my nose. So literally crushed it. I had broken bones sticking out and broken cartilage.
Do you have a helmet on?
No.
So this is no helmet.
Pre-helmet. Helmets were just coming in, and they only had the temple guards.
Yeah, I was going to say we've got Kyle Hooper as our head coach, and he talks about even when he played Test cricket, had the temple guards, and like that bowler was fairly quick, or
He wasn't actually that quick.
Right, okay, so it was just really the top edge.
Yeah, it was the top edge
straight off the bat.
Me, yeah. And the reason why I tried to pull it was because he wasn't that quick.
Yeah, okay.
But yeah, we did have a visor as well at the time, but it was perspex with holes in it.
Yes, yeah.
And when you basically front it up, you kept hitting the visor onto your shoulder. And so it was really, really uncomfortable. So I refused to wear that. I wish I'd worn it.
Yeah.
But anyway, I went back to training after about probably 6 to 8 weeks later. It was that bad because I had to have plastic surgery. I had to get it re-broken, and it was a mess. And I remember facing Simon Davis, who was playing with Australia at the time. He was playing with the Australia one-day team. They used to call him Sniffer Davis. And as you know, when you train, no one ever uses the 22-metre.
No, you've come in. Yeah, no balls are a thing.
No, that's right. So they're bowling at about 18 metres.
Yeah,
and they're coming at about 100k, 160k an hour at you. And again, I tried to wear the helmet. I don't mind saying it, I was scared.
Yeah.
I was scared. I was scared of getting my nose broken again. I was scared of having to go back into hospital. I was scared of the ball. I was scared of a whole bunch of different things. And I just said, this is not for me. This is not for me. There and then on the spot, I just walked out and I said, I'm not coming back.
That was it.
That was it.
That was the last time you played.
That was it.
How old were you there?
20. I reckon I would have been about 20.
So did you face a lot of backlash from your team or friends and stuff like that? Like, where are you going? What are you doing? Like,
None. I virtually never contacted them again.
Just left the club?
Just left the club. And my dad was a life member there. I just spoke to him. I had a really good relationship with my dad. I just said, I can't do it.
Yeah.
And by that stage I was doing, as I said, I was running. I'd started playing around with swimming and bike riding, and because a lot of my mates were into this new thing called triathlon, and they said, "Oh, it's this great thing." Because I was doing a Bachelor of Health and Physical Education at it was Rusden back then, but it became Deakin Uni, and they said, "Oh, it's great, so much fun. If you can run, you'll be able to do a triathlon." And so I went, so I started playing around with that, playing around with swimming. Again, I'd surfed a lot because I came from the Mornington Peninsula. Never ridden a bike ever, other than ride with my surfboard under my arm to go surfing or something. But I thought, all right, I'll give this a go. So basically, what I did, I'm not joking, I stopped cricket, and the next day I started triathlon.
That was it.
That was it.
Just a massive, quick transit, like kit gone.
So from 4 hours a day of training to cricket.
Yeah.
To 4 hours a day of training for triathlon.
Right. So you didn't really lose any sort of sense of sport and training and stuff like that. That was that drive hadn't gone.
No. It was just a flip.
Yeah.
It was just a flip into something else. And I became obsessed with it. Absolutely obsessed with triathlon. I remember my first race, I reckon I thought I'd just give it a go. It was and the interesting thing was the short course races then were 1.5k swim, 40k ride and a 10k run, and that was your short course race.
Wow.
Which became Olympic distance.
Yeah.
And so that was the Olympic distance, and I reckon there was about 360 competitors, something like that, and I think I came about 180th.
Yeah, okay.
And I thought, I'm just absolutely hooked here, but I was so annoyed with myself for coming so far down.
Right.
But then I did the race the following year, and I came top 15. So,
right. Yeah. Wow.
It was like, that's how much I
so did you have a goal there? Like, other than, was this to make a state team? Was it to make
Hawaii Ironman?
Was to go Hawaii?
Yeah.
Right.
Everyone was talking about this thing called the Hawaii Ironman, and of course I'd seen it on a Wide World of Sports and all those sorts of things, and that was the holy grail. And so from me, just like literally starting to swim, running, having run, and then starting to swim and then starting to bike, I thought, right, I'm going to do this Hawaii Ironman.
Yeah.
Come hell or high water.
But one of the former previous guests I've had on the podcast, a guy called Cameron Brown. So Cameron Brown's 12-time New Zealand Ironman champion, and he talks about, he's a he's a beast. Like, he's 48 years old and he's still going.
Yeah.
And he is churning it. Like, I look at his stats on like Strava, and they are incredible. This guy, and he talked about Hawaii being just another animal. It's like it's every race you can do. The courses are sort of, you know them, and you know the conditions, but Hawaii just will turn. Yeah. And he said, like, you could be doing your ride into almost the same speed winds, and it's just and the currents, and it sounds a beast.
It was.
So how far did you get with it?
Yeah. I did. So I think I remember having my 20. I think I had my 22nd birthday over in Hawaii.
Yeah. Wow.
So it was only would have been my third year of triathlon. So I qualified for the Hawaii Ironman in the Australian Ironman. I think I came 15th or something in that. And that was in my second or third year. No, that would have been the start of my third year. Qualified for Hawaii, did that, and then went and did Japan Ironman the year after. Yep. And then went and did, and then 10 years later did the New Zealand Ironman. Yeah, okay. But then I did all the other short courses and whatever in between, and started doing a bit professionally, and got enough money to, live, and still living at home and all those sorts of things, but had shoe sponsors and clothes sponsors and food sponsors, and it was great. Yeah, it was good. And back then it was triathlon was cool. Yeah.
Even Cameron said that there was good sponsorship in it. Yeah, and it'd be an interesting place to see it from then till now. I mean, everything's technology based now, and there's a lot of more. Yeah. But I think one of his sponsors, he was saying that when he won Japan, and he said it was like Coca-Cola. Yeah. So it was like free Coke for the rest of the year or something like that. So those were the sponsorships.
I had the banana industry.
Right, okay.
Seriously, the banana industry. And I used to go to the Victoria markets and I would pick up as many bananas as I would want. Just loads of them. I remember there was a clothing company called Sweat Hog Clothing. And I used to go to the factory, and I would literally just load up my car with clothes and walk out. I was sponsored by Brooks, so they would give me like 6 pairs of shoes a year, and there was so many different organisations that just wanted to jump on the bandwagon because it was so new and so cool and so different. It's a very different feel now, triathlon.
Well, it's almost it's way more accessible, isn't it? Because everyone almost, you can run your own Ironman, your own triathlon, just off your phone. Almost, you don't have to be entering a competition. What was the thing I'm interested actually in is your transition out of a team sport into an individual? Like, you did it overnight. Yeah. Did you miss like teammates? Did you just feel an individual sport was the thing for you? Or
no, it's funny. It's really funny when I played cricket. Because I was either an opening batsman or a number 3 batsman, it's a funny thing to say, but I always found it really individual.
Because that's a good point.
You lived and breathed according to your own success. And when you're playing fourths, and then playing thirds, and then playing seconds, it didn't matter where the team came. It didn't matter whether the team won or lost. It mattered on your score. I mean, I sort of battled around. I remember when I was 14 or so and playing fourths, and I was, scrapping around making 20s and 30s, and then all of a sudden you'd make a 70. Boom, you went up to the thirds, and you go, well, okay. And then you'd scrap around there in your 30s and 40s, and boom, I made a century, and then all of a sudden I'm in the seconds. So you didn't really care where the team came. It was all about you. And so, in the end, you're kind of watching there, and you'd go out early if you're opening or first drop, and you'd be kind of thinking, well, hope the team goes out, because if the whole team goes out, then I get another opportunity to bat again.
Yeah, okay.
Do you know?
Yeah, wow.
So
it's interesting. Other people would have probably different views and be like, nah, team first, I don't care if I get 0. I'm kind of sway towards your way of thinking there, because, and I was talking about it to even our team, saying, in order for a team to be successful, you as an individual have to find your reason why you play. Yeah. You have to find the reason why you're doing what you're doing. Yeah. And that could be anything. So your reason for doing well. So ultimately a team success stems off, in this case, 11 individuals doing their best and and doing the best of their ability and actually succeeding, doing well. If you don't do well, the team's not going to do well. But as a collective, you can get away with one person having a great score and they can change the game, or having a great day on the field. But ultimately, you don't want to rely on one person.
No.
So if you as an individual, you need to find where that purpose, that drive, that passion comes from in order for you to do well. It could be the team doing well. The example could be I'm trying to do well in my skill because I want the team to succeed. I actually have a very selfish way of looking at it, and I know professionals have a similar approach, is because if I do well, yes, I personally feel like I'm better than... So if I take 6 wickets, I know I'm better than 6 people on that day. That's a very egotistical way of looking at it, but it's a thing that will get the team in the right direction. It's a byproduct.
Well, absolutely, but the thing is when you're in the lower levels, in the fourth and the thirds and the seconds, trying to get into the first, and then trying to get into the state team, and then trying to get into the test team. When you ultimately get there, probably when you get to the first, and certainly when you get to state and test level, then it becomes this whole team mentality because you've actually made it. But until that point, all you're doing is trying to get there. You're not really a part of a team. And because you're so fluid in the fourths and the thirds and the seconds, you're up and down and up and down. All you're really doing is marching time to try and get a score that's going to allow you to fulfill your talent to be where you want to be.
Yeah.
Then you can start really getting involved with your teammates and team and all those sorts of things. But it's so transient. It's so the lower levels are so transient, and it's not like a batsman as opposed to like a footballer who's playing in the back line and their role is to negate another person, for example. If you're a batsman in a team, your role is to make runs.
Yeah.
Your role isn't just to hold up an end and just block. It's there to make runs, and if you make runs, you get promoted. It's a simple process.
Yeah, I think it also depends where your goal is, kind of being probably a little bit realistic as to where you go. I think both of us are speaking from a passion of wanting to go to higher honours.
Yeah.
There are people that will feel there's a ceiling to their ability and their skill. So that ceiling could be second team, it could be third team, whatever it is. And you're right though. You're waiting for that score to get. Well, you shouldn't be waiting. You should be trying to make it happen.
That's right.
You should be trying to make that score, that performance happen to get you up into that team. That's a really good point. Where for you did the sport start to move aside, and then sort of the academics come into it, and you start to move into the field you're in now?
All right. So I put everything I had into triathlon. I remember even my last year of uni, I was skipping classes, like lots of classes, getting people, because this is before everything went online and like it is now. I remember people taking notes for me. I remember people, saying I was at tutorials and I was about to come to a tutorial and I wasn't actually there enough because I'd be riding up in the hills on my bike and all those sorts of things. I was just scrambling to finish uni, and I did, and that was cool. And I remember I got a job offer pretty much straight away to go and teach in the country, and I turned it down because I didn't want to go to the country. I didn't want to teach full time. I just wanted to do relief teaching because I loved this new sport so much. I'd had a discussion with my parents, and I said, could I stay at home still and do relief teaching? And they said, yeah, that's fine. So it was all cool in that respect. And I did that. I did that probably for about 4 years. And as I said, I'd done Hawaii and the Australian Ironman, New Zealand, and I was doing all the circuit around Victoria, and I was earning some good money doing bits and pieces, and then obviously the relief teaching. But all I found was that I was after about 4 years, just going to the pool all the time, doing these long rides all the time. I'd be training nearly 40 hours a week, and all I was doing was socialising with other triathletes. And a lot of other triathletes, are very limited. You don't do much. You sleep, you run, you ride, you swim, you eat,
Yeah.
you don't go out, you do it all again, rinse, repeat sort of thing. So I guess I was just getting bored of the same people. My socialising was at the pool, my socialising was on the bike, my socialising was running, and I was really starting to get a bit bored with all of that. And I thought, what am I going to do with the rest of my life kind of thing? And I started to do a master's degree. I looked into doing a master's degree in health and physical education. And it was online. And back then we had typewriters. We didn't have computers.
Right.
And everything that was, it wasn't online. It was distance learning. It was called.
Yep.
And so they'd actually send you big wads of material. They'd send you books and learning, modules and big folders. And anyway, cut a long story short, I used to do, a 4 or 5 hour ride on a Wednesday, and all of a sudden I'd be cutting that back to 2 hours because I'd want to get back to my study. Mm-hmm. A 20k run would become a 10k run. A 6k session in the pool would become a 3 or 4k session because, I wanted to get back and study. And I went, something's happening here. Wow. I was loving the study so much. And what I actually found was that I ended up inquiring about how I could actually go to Deakin Uni at Geelong and live on campus there and finish the rest of my degree there, which I did. Ended up getting a PhD scholarship. Applied for various places, got a PhD scholarship over in Perth at Edith Cowan Uni. And one of my passions was looking at the social construction of masculinity in sports, because sociology of sport was one of the things I was really interested in. Yeah,
and first off, that was really interesting that you got bored of that community.
Yeah.
And would that, just a bit of a guess, but is that stemming from, because cricket is a social sport, do you think that was something that you perhaps missed from the sport, and you were like, you'd had a taste in what social life in sport could be like, and then in triathlon it was completely different, was it purely that the sport was wearing thin?
No, the sport wasn't wearing thin, because ultimately I ended up getting back into it just as much, even if not more, but certainly not in the longer distance when I went to Perth. So I loved the sport, don't get me wrong. And I don't know, because I was never a big socialiser with the cricket scene anyway. I never drank a lot. I didn't smoke. I didn't take drugs. A lot of as you know, the cricket scene, there's a lot of alcohol.
Yep.
A lot of, and I sort of did. I wasn't a big part of that. Despite my younger years being captain of the football team, captain of the cricket team, all of those sorts of things that come with with being on a hierarchy of masculinity. I sort of those things didn't excite me a lot.
Yeah. Okay.
And it's probably the way I was raised. I wasn't raised by wowsers by any stretch of the imagination, but my parents really had good morals and ethics and that sort of thing.
Yeah. So your study started to go into the construct of masculinity.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you why.
Okay.
And that is, when I was doing my master's degree, I wanted to. I had a friend called Jeff Case, who was the world stair climbing champion, and they run
They do the towers.
The towers, yeah. So the Empire State Building and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Anyway, he said to me, "Yeah, look, I'll get you into there was a run up the Rialto Tower in Victoria." And he said, "Yeah, look, I'll get you in, no problem. I know the race organizer." So I trained every stair imaginable for about 8 weeks to try and get to do this race.
How many stairs are we talking?
Oh, I can't remember. It's like about, I don't know, the Rialto Tower. I don't know. I really don't know. It's a lot.
Yeah.
I'd have to go back and find it. But if anyone wants to quickly Google it while they're, but it's a lot. It's a hell of a lot of stairs, believe me. Anyway, I rock up to the race that morning, and I said, "Jeff, okay, you said you were going to get me in." And he goes, "Oh, shit, I forgot about it. And so he's running around trying to get me into this race. And anyway, he nabs the race organizer, and there was 100 spots open for men and 100 spots open for women. And they were both running at different times, about 30 minutes apart. And there was the same media coverage, the same money, the same everything. Now, there was about 110 guys trying to do this race, and there were only 50 women that turned up to do theirs.
Right.
And I'm thinking, what makes running up the Rialto Tower so inviting for men, and yet why did only 50 women turn up to do their race?
Right.
You know, so
and you said there's same amount of
everything,
prize money,
prize money, same media coverage, same everything. And
Nothing's
this was back.
different.
This was back, you know, in sort of the early 90s. So anyway. And again, to cut a long story short, I ended up getting in no problems because like 10 people didn't turn up, so I was able to do the race. It was a hell of a race too. And did it all and everything, but I came back and I remember talking to my master supervisor at the time. We were actually talking about this, and he goes, well, you should really think about studying something like that. And I said, yeah, you're right. And I mean, I'd been interested in the way I sort of moved out of cricket. Did that have anything to do with masculinity? Me going into triathlon, did that have anything to do with masculinity?
So these are questions you're asking yourself at the time?
I'm asking myself all this at the time.
But why was that question? I'm trying to connect the dots there with the tower run. Where did masculinity fall into that? So you're going, why are males overpowering this event by numbers?
Yeah, what is it that prompts so many men to run this tower? Why aren't there 110 women also trying to run this as well? What? Yeah, you know,
it's a tower. It's getting to the top.
Exactly.
Can a man climb to the top?
Yeah. So all these guys are like, they're going at it to try and beat each other, and yet there were only 50 women that wanted to do that. And I thought, what the heck's going on here?
Yeah.
You know, why can't I just join the women's race? You know, I was like it was these are the things that were going on in my head.
Yeah.
And so that really it got me thinking about what is it about sport that is so important to men?
Yeah.
You know, and so, and in terms of the way in which they construct their masculinity. And so, and then, you know, I mean, I ended up doing a whole PhD on it. And I started to look at sport and the rites of passage and all of those sorts of things. For like I mean, really, if you're a young male, if you're a boy, you have eye-hand coordination. You can play the masculinized sports in Australia like football, cricket, basketball, rugby. You'll be relatively privileged.
So your PhD was on Australian sports?
Well, no,
based in Australia.
It was on. I looked at 3 sports, individual sports, because I wanted to specifically look at the way in which masculinity was constructed amongst those 3. Surf lifesaving, which is an iconic Australian sport.
Yep.
Triathlon. And bodybuilding.
Yeah, okay.
So, and what I did was I did case studies with groups of men within those, and they all had to be at the absolute elite level. And so there were some really interesting things. But I mean, basically what we're trying to say here is what is it about sport that makes it so important for males to engage in order to reflect their masculinity. And I always go back to, you know, I went to school with a national figure skating champion. A lot of guys at school, you know, would call him a fag, a gay, or whatever, because he was a figure skating champion, because he's a figure skater. Not the fact that he was national champion. He was a figure skater. And the guy trained just as much as I did with cricket, you know, 4 hours a day, 5 hours a day. And yet, when you're looking at a hierarchy of masculinity, the boy in the first 18 football team who would just scrape in, and he wasn't a very good footballer, was probably ranked higher on the hierarchy of masculinity than this boy who was national champion figure skater. Because the boy who was the least skillful in the team, he was playing the most masculinized sport. But he wasn't very skillful at all. He was just making up the numbers. And you've got this other highly skilled young male who's doing figure skating, and he wasn't looked at as masculine at all. So you're starting to look at the types of sports that men do and what are masculinized and what are not. again, at the top of the tree is your football and cricket and rugby and so forth. And I've since done a lot of work with young males, and some of the boys call them blood sports.
Yeah.
And as opposed to your tennis and golf, which are sort of on that next level, but they also have a fair degree of masculinity associated with them too, given the amount of prize money they have. Mm. But at the schoolboy level, they're not as masculinized as and then you've got,
Is that a coincidence that they're team sports? The like they're groups,
probably.
They're tribal, in a sense. Yeah. So rather than them being on their own.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that.
Yeah, because you get those team sports provide you with social endorsement. Mm-hmm. I mean, I remember I remember rocking up after. I remember in under 14s or under 15s or something. We had a down in Victoria a rule that you had to retire at 50. To give everyone a go. Mm-hmm. That was the new rule. And I think I ended up having an average of like 300 and something because I never went out. Yeah. And I remember that was sort of went around school, and I never had to say it once.
Yeah, okay. Followed you like a medal.
Yeah, exactly. So he's just like, yeah.
Wow, yeah.
So do you know what I mean? So I didn't have to. Whereas, I watched my son, for example, who's involved in individual sport of surf lifesaving, even though it is team oriented. But again, the races are individual. Mm-hmm. I mean, he went to a school that was, he's just finished year 12, and he went to a school that was, very football and cricket oriented, and again, like virtually no one knew kind of what sport he did.
Right.
He's a swimmer, but he swims. He does 12 to 14 sessions a week of around about anywhere between an hour and a half to 2 hours on each of those sessions. So he's training at least 30 hours a week while doing year 12, national level, making state teams at the absolute national level, making national finals and all those sorts of things. But again, he would dare not say anything at school because the sport that he does was perceived as not cool and not masculine.
Yeah.
And yet I would say, like I saw him out a couple of years ago at the national championships, and they were swimming in 6 to 7 foot surf. That's huge.
Yeah.
Absolutely huge. Bear in mind that a 6 to 7 foot wave is not just 6 or 7 foot.
That's terrifying.
That's the face of the wave.
Yeah.
So it ends up being, really from, the face, it ends up being sort of like 12, 13 feet.
Yeah. That's terrifying.
Yeah, it's terrifying. I was terrified as a parent. I've just written a paper on it and how terrified I was.
Really?
Yeah, it was a nightmare.
So what have you found then this is fascinating because what have you found are the sort of elements that create that masculinity within, is it society? Is it the sport itself? Is it the image of the sport?
It's everything. It's everything. Oh, if I can jump in, it's everything. It's the way we construct it. It's the way we laud certain aspects of it. It's how. I mean, you listen to the commentators, for example, in watching, particularly as being an Australian football fan and player, and been you listen to the commentators. Last year, the mark of the year was a guy named Sam Walsh, a young Carlton player. Now, normally, the mark of the year is a mark that someone jumps on another person's shoulders or head or height, and it's spectacular. Yeah. This one won mark of the year because he ran back into the pack, and he almost got cleaned up by the oncoming, I think it was Charlie Dixon from Port Adelaide. Right. So this guy is probably just on 6 foot. Charlie Dixon's about 6'6", 6'7", and weighs at probably about 110 kilos. And Sam Walsh weighs at about 75 kilos. And yet he ran back with the ball, with Charlie Dixon coming towards the front. He leapt up and marked it, and he landed on the ground like a like a pack of sack of potatoes, I should say. Just thudded to the ground. The commentators went berserk on how awesome that was, and how brave he was, and how So any young guy sees that. Any young male that sees that, and particularly if they're a Carlton supporter, would be running around doing a Sam Walsh.
Mm.
And so what that's doing...
Were they talking about the skill?
No, they're talking about the bravery. So that's the whole thing. So if a man can do that and get so much applause...
For being brave.
And that was the whole thing about Jonathan Brown. His whole legacy of his career is about the amount of concussions that he had, and his bravery being able to run back into packs. Now, I often say to my students, because we talk about this a lot in my sports sociology class. So Jonathan Brown used to get knocked out a lot, and he would have to either go off the field for the rest of that match, or he'd have the repercussions and not be able to play the next week. So would you rather Jonathan Brown running back into a pack, not actually mark the ball, but just show to his teammates that I'm a man and I can take this mark, but he often didn't because the crunch would come.
Yeah.
So would you rather have that guy concussed going off, or would you rather him take the option of turning around and maybe getting hit on the side or whatever, not taking the mark, but being able to stay on for the rest of the game potentially and kick more goals and then have them available for the next week?
Yeah.
I know what I would rather have.
Yeah.
But the coach would say, but he's showing commitment to the team, and he's putting his body on the line, and blah, blah, blah. It's like the old, it's like the movie 1917. The guys, all those Englishmen jumping out of the trenches on the Western Front there, and just being mowed down. It's okay. They're doing it for country.
Well, that's almost that's sort of where my mind was going.
Yeah.
Like bravery is sort of be brave. William Wallace, like everyone just run into the fire.
That's it. Run into the fire, and that's expected of you because you're a man.
Yeah.
So so we've had these disparities between what men do and what women do. Women were the nurses, and in the war, they were the caregivers and all of those sorts of things, whereas the men were meant to put their body on the line. We still do it now in a whole bunch of different, like men. Men are the ones who are the carpenters, and they jump on the roof. And sure, there's a number of female carpenters as well. Don't get me wrong, but there's still far more men who are doing the more dangerous occupations. Yeah. It's just the way we've constructed our society, So it's just a very it's a cultural thing, but it's also an historical thing, and it's happened. I don't want to get too far back into cultural anthropology kind of stuff, but the hunter and gatherers were always the men, and they were the ones that put their body on the line, and they caught whereas the women were the one who cooked and those sorts of things, and reared children. And now there's many other cultures, don't get me wrong, that have flipped that around as well, but historically that's kind of the way it's been, and the expectation is that within sport men have to do the same as well.
Where do you feel something like biology takes a bit of a step into it with, like you're saying there, with the men who do predominantly more of the manual work, but that being due to a biological...
well, I'm a social constructionist.
Yeah.
So I do struggle with the whole notion of biology. I understand that there's elements of testosterone. I understand there's elements of muscularity and strength and power and all those sorts of things. However, we have largely socially constructed the way in which we exist and the way in which we run our lives. Yeah. So, because there's... personally, I think that there's so many things that women can do, albeit in a slightly different form, that are just as comparable to what men can do.
Yeah, for sure. Where do you feel this is a huge impact for young people? So I think we had this discussion when we first met, and this is probably where I triggered and thought, right, let's have a podcast, because we were talking about, and you experienced it when you were younger, talking about when you were in country footy, you were a young lad going into a men's team, you were almost expendable in a sense.
Yeah.
And I experienced that. Yeah. I was 14 years old when I played my first A grade, first team men's game. And you are walking into a changing room. Men are showering. Men are talking. These are guys in their mid to late 20s, maybe 30s, that are talking about what they're up to on the weekend. Yeah. There's alcohol. There's drugs. There's
sex. There's women.
Everything. Yeah. They're talking about everything and openly, because it's their place. It's locker room talk is the sense of what you, if you want to call it that. But that has. That constructed in a certain way can be very detrimental to a young person. We actually, funny enough, experienced that with a young lad in our team this year or last year. He had a poor experience just with how open speaking one of the men was, so we had to kind of reprimand the man and speak to the young boy and say like that was something, and it really opened my eyes and resonate with the conversation we had. Where do you think it has come from, sort of the not where it's come from, but where it has been to where it's potentially going, or where it could go, or where you perhaps like to see it go?
So I guess the locker room has been kind of that safe space for a lot of guys in terms of what they think they can say, how they can say it, pretty much say anything, because it's often said that what goes on in the locker room sort of stays in the locker room kind of thing. And that's not necessarily the case, because if I put my social constructionism hat on, if you've got young, impressionable males in that locker room that gravitate towards that kind of ideology, then they're going to perpetuate the same sort of language and so forth. Now, the problem is, it shouldn't be said in the locker room, but the bigger problem is if it's taken out of the locker room and it's said, and those ideologies and so forth go beyond that locker room as well. So that's a problem. So we have the opportunity within sporting environments to create spaces that we can actually change those sorts of attitudes and behaviours and talk as well. Because locker rooms, as we're saying, have men in their 30s, even 40s sometimes, right through to these young guys who are coming through in 14 years of age. And what they hear from these older players who they revere, that can impact them in both positive and negative way. For me, and as I mentioned to you, it impacted me in a negative way. And I remember going and talking to my dad about it. I think it would have been about 15 or so. And I was there, and they were all the guys sort of walking around naked for half an hour to an hour on end, and not even caring, and drinking beer naked, and talking about how much sex they'd had. And I remember talking to my dad about it, and he said, well, there's a couple of ways you can go. Because it's really hard in that situation too. Because as a young guy, you can't say, "Oh, guys, I really don't like it." You probably could, but you'd probably be immediately put on the outer. So there needs to be someone in positions of power to be able to do that. And as I said, my dad sort of said to me, "Well, there's a couple of ways you can go. You're going to struggle to change attitudes and behaviours at 14 and 15 years of age of those older guys. But you can change the way you think about that, and you can either go with those guys or bring your own attitudes and behaviours and move against it. And then when you have a position of power, which I kind of do now as a professor, that's when you're trying to have those changes and so forth. And as you get older within that club too, you could probably talk to the coach more, and and those sorts of things. It's really, really hard in those situations for young males.
It is. You're really breaking. You're trying to break up, literally, your culture.
Yes.
And you're right. You have that option of, I think, do I choose to have create a different culture? But it screams of having good leaders.
Yes.
So the leadership is so crucial.
Absolutely.
And understanding who in your group is a good leader, who is a poor leader. Because I also feel that in those environments, as a senior player, as a man, like there are guys in, say, the changing room that I'm in. There's changing rooms I've been in where people will say something to adhere to the group, to work with the group, and for it to sound right to the group and to this social norm that is out there. But if you were to have that person on their own, they'd be like, nah, I probably don't think that way, which is so interesting. So it really does take strong leadership in order to have your own stand in your own culture, and create that space for these people to do well. Is there anything you have found that you feel could be done better within teams for them in order to create that better space for men and building their masculinity? Yeah,
look, it's chipping away at it, but it's got to come from the top down, and it has to be quite a systemic kind of approach. So there has to be strong. It has to be strong presidents. If you've got CEOs of sporting organisations, it's got to come from CEOs, presidents, boards. They all have to endorse it, and there has to be some sort of, because there has to be a collective champion of change. It's really hard for one person to rail against it. I've even in surf clubs and so forth, which are kind of masculinised spaces, not as much as they were, probably 40 or 50 years ago. But they are masculinised spaces, and change rooms are always a bit of fun and banter and those sorts of things at surf clubs. But, there's some things that I hear from these young guys, and I'll pull them up on it if they're using, misogynist or homophobic language and, that sort of thing. And I'm sure that these young guys just think I'm a crazy old man, because that's the kind of thing. And they're probably in their own head thinking they're not actually going to enact out what they're actually saying. But it is, someone does need to call it out on occasions. And if that's me in my position of power and leadership, then so be it, because I'm coaching coordinator at my surf club. But we have a lot of really good policies at our surf club as well. And so I then have, well, come on guys, you can't say that. Well, I'm not a crazy old man, because we have these policies in place set up by the board, the president, Oh, okay.
Yeah,
and
it's
we've got a change room policy now. Everyone in the club. I can't remember the last time I saw a naked person in our change room.
Really?
No.
Right.
So I was in the change room last night with another guy who was 60, 61. We're the only two in the change room. And yet we both put towels around ourselves and changed with towels around us, because that's the policy.
Yeah. And that stemmed because you've got kids and in the group as well.
Yep. But there was no one else in the change room, but that's the policy. So we all know it. It's taken some time, but and so these things take time. So if we change attitudes and behaviours, then we can, and the language that we use within these environments, then things can change.
Yeah.
But they have to come. It has to be done in a systematic way, and there has to be, rather than, yes, it's good to have one champion, don't get me wrong, but if it comes from the top down, board level, CEO, president, members, all those sorts of things, then you've got really something substantial to fall back on, and it has to take a whole club approach. And we're doing those sorts of things now. We've just got a grant recently, and I called it, so it was a breakthrough mental health grant, and also with Arama Institute, and it's called taking a village approach, because you say
a village to raise a child.
It takes a village to raise a child. So we're saying, my argument is that every child in Australia at some point will go through, it might only be for a day or two, but it might be for many years, will go through a sporting club at some point.
Yeah.
Because that's just kind of what we do here in Australia.
Yeah.
So they're going to have contact with a sporting club. So there has to be someone within that club that has the capacity to understand and champion inclusive behaviours, including mental health. The types of attitudes we have, the behaviour, the language, all those sorts of things. So that club needs to take a whole village approach to raising that child around those sorts of issues. And that becomes then a real safe space for that child.
Yeah, because sport is so important for raising children. Yeah. This is where it's super interesting as well, because sport, anything, creates almost a pathway to life.
Yeah.
So where do you find that balance of, I guess there will be people that could listen to this and will listen on the topics we're talking about going, masculinity, what a load of crap. And you're just going to soften people up, and you're just going to, but there has to be, that where is your line for allowing people to become almost too protected and then actually ready for life? Because my personal opinion is that there are parents at the moment are super protective of, but I actually don't think this is in a masculinity space. This is in a success and failure space. I'm going to hide from failure, whereas you need it. You need to have that. But then the male construct of the environment is really important for dealing with success, dealing with failure, because they can either shoot you down and they can bash you into the ground even harder, or they can build you up and try to resurrect you a little bit more.
Okay, I'll give you an example then. So back when I was facing, the fast bowler, I can guarantee you, after I'd broken my nose and I'm facing that fast bowler, Simon Davis, and the ball's whizzing around my head and everything, and I just, in my head right there and then, I'd checked out. That was it. If I'd gone to my coach and or the fast bowlers and the other guys, and I'd said, look guys, I'm really struggling here. I'm really struggling facing this bowling. I'm really scared. I don't think I can do this. I don't know how they would have reacted. Back then, I really don't know, because it's kind of like, it was like a, it was like a dog-eat-dog kind of attitude. Well, if you can't hack it, then don't play.
Move on, yeah.
So, whereas I was a pretty decent cricketer, I thought, but I've lost to the sport. I'm lost to the sport. I never, ever played another game. I never, ever batted again. I never batted again, ever. Never put on a pair of pads again.
I can't. That for me is amazing that you actually did that.
Yeah, and so, but had I had someone or a group of guys from the club that I would sit down and talk with and talk it through, maybe I would have come back in 6 months.
Is that because you knew that space wasn't there? Because you just genuinely knew that if I open up about I'm scared of the ball, no one's going to fix this problem. They almost feel like you're broken, and that's it. You're
probably. I just knew that was a highly masculinized environment, and they just wouldn't get it. So I went to somewhere else where I had control over it. I had my destiny was in my hands, and that was just through training. Yeah. And it wasn't about me being just scared of the ball. I can remember on my bike in a race, in a pair of Speedos, no shirt on, and a helmet, which really wasn't a helmet. It was like this piece of plastic, and I was looking at my Speedo, and I was doing like 92 kilometers an hour. Now tell me that's
quite scary.
Yeah, it's quite scary. So do you know what I mean? So.
But you can wrap that into a masculine approach, can't you? You can build that into I'm flying down 92 k's an hour and I'm butt naked.
Yeah.
If I fall off, I'm going to tear up my skin. I'm going to cut everything open. You can make it sound manly, can't you?
Yeah.
And
but
I think
it was just about. It was about winning.
But that's the thing. I think you made the point with the figure skater as well, saying that you're judging people on what it looks like, rather than the actual work that's inside it. I find the Olympics really, I find the Olympics and the ceremonies at the end, when everyone's got their medals, everyone's got that, because you ultimately are looking at whether it's a team, it could be like a hockey team, it could be an archer, it could be a 100-meter sprinter. They've all done that 4 years of training. They've all done that one section of their life that they've all worked towards the same thing. They've all got just the same, which is a gold medal for their country. And I'm just reading, I spoke about it in the last podcast, but Agassi's book.
I read that too.
It's an incredible book, and but he talks
quite
about
sad in many respects.
Very sad, and it's so it literally is open. It's so vulnerable, and amazing how in depth he goes into things. But one of the amazing things was when he played for America at the Olympics. And it like changed his mentality. He was like, I'm fighting for something now. I'm playing for something, and
he wasn't playing for his dad.
No, and I just think of. Then his skill came through. He was talking about his skill, and he really switched on. Whereas, if you are looking at him as in the hierarchy of the Olympics, he was probably the most highest paid person there. He had all the medals, but he was like, I'm in with all the other athletes. I'm now one of a team that is working towards this common goal, which was quite amazing, because he could have just bought a Ferrari, he could have bought a house, and in the hierarchy of that whole construct, he was. He had it all. Yeah, absolutely. But as a player, he was one of the others who was just fighting for another medal. It's fascinating. Where do you think women play a part in the whole aspect of this, in supporting it and building it? Because again, masculinity will be faced around some sort of drive, and women play a big part of that for a lot of men. So where do you feel their role comes in building the masculinity of men?
In terms of the relationships they have with men, or in terms of women and sport, the sport that's
I mean, there's loads of different angles you could go there, isn't there? I would say in building their own masculinity for themselves.
Okay, so in all the research that I've done with men, it's a lot of people think that masculinity is in opposition to femininity, and it is to a point, because often men they will view their bodies in opposition to being feminine. That is, they don't want to be perceived as being weak and less muscular and so forth, and so it will often be in opposition to the feminine ideal, which is thin and curvy, all those sorts of things. So, but when it comes to masculinity per se, men want to compete against men. They want to be admired by men. They want to be revered by men. They don't really care about women.
Yeah, okay. It's top of the pile.
Yeah. If a woman says how great they are, that's okay. But I can guarantee you that like, let's say for an AFL footballer, if a woman says, gee, you're a great player, that's wonderful. But if that comment comes from another player who they respect,
that's true.
That far outweighs anything. I mean, the classic example is the bodybuilders that I interviewed, like, a number of them, they could care less what their girlfriend said. They could care less what other women said. All they wanted to be was revered by other bodybuilders. If another bodybuilder who they revered said, geez, your pecs look good, geez, your biceps look good, geez, you're really coming on, blah, 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 that would be it. Yeah. I mean, a lot of these guys were taking so much drugs, they hadn't had erection for 12, 18 months anyway. So it wasn't... And yet they had their girlfriends, but the girlfriends sort of had to toe the line. They didn't care about that. They just cared about what other men said. So masculinity is bound by masculinity. So the men want to be revered by men. And that's historical, Great leaders want to be revered by either, opposition leaders for being fearless and all of those sorts of things.
So do you think that most of this...
Male leaders, I should say.
The end result is to change that, to change where we find our appreciation for being a man, or is it to bring awareness to each individual man of where they're looking for that drive? Or
it is important. It's important that that male sportsmen can still attain their sense of masculinity through appreciation of other male sportsmen. That's fine. It's how we go about changing the way in which masculinity is socially constructed within our society. And it has to be, we have placed a lot of emphasis on through sport and through what we call, as I said, the young boys call it blood sports and so forth. There's so many other outlets now that masculinity, which is important to males, but can be expressed, and it can be expressed through the arts. It can be expressed through dance and music and culture and education, and so I think things are starting to change. So there's different types of masculinity now that are being constructed in society. But we still do place a significant amount on sports and on traditional masculinized sports as well.
And so what have you found are some of the real, I guess, far end of the spectrums in a negative space? So in sort of like, people talk about toxic masculinity. Yeah. What have you found that some of the outcomes are when people aren't aware of masculinity as a powerful man, I guess, in a sense? So what I'm trying to get at is people will talk about toxic masculinity as being like that far end of the spectrum. They have no appreciation for women. The other end, they want to be almost narcissistic on top of men. Where do you find that leads to the individual? Is it things like depression? Is it can it be just mental space or a physical?
Oh, look, the whole notion of toxic masculinity is concerning. It's concerning not only for the individuals who display it. It's concerning for those who follow it, who endorse it, who it's enacted upon. All of those sorts of things. I think as a society and as a culture, ranges of masculinities and femininities need to be taught and understood, and it's got to happen at schools. It's got to happen in places of education, and it has to happen in places, workplaces. We've seen what's going on now in Parliament House. Mm-hmm. We're hearing what's going on in the private schools and so forth, with in Sydney with rape allegations and so forth, coming from girls who have been involved with boys in these so-called elite private schools in Sydney. We need to challenge that. And young males need to understand that what they do and how they enact a toxic form of masculinity is simply not appropriate. And we need to do better as a society in order to, to challenge it.
Yeah, and sport is a great vehicle for doing that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because of the leadership, I think that just everything is around that leadership.
Yeah,
if there's
absolutely.
anything, the leaders have to take a stand. Look, I'm so conscious of time.
Yes.
The last thing, I read you recently did a paper on a lost generation to COVID.
Oh, yes.
So do you think how do you feel COVID is going to impact sort of how, I don't know, this perhaps lost generation, because everything that paper was really around the communities that are affected, and like you said, it takes a village to raise a child. So do you feel there's going to be a blip in I guess losing people to sport. In the UK, for example, they've lost a lot of education time with COVID. So I've had jokes about there being sort of like a dumb generation, but that could actually be
I just know in the squad that my son swims at, they had a 3 or 4 month break, and there were people that were coming to the end of their so-called swimming careers, and swimming is a very youthful sport. So, you can retire at 18 or 19. And I know that a number of people sort of pulled the pin at 17 because they knew that having a 3 or 4 month break away from swimming, and it's a sport where you struggle to have 3 or 4 months away and then get back into the pool and do it all again. And a lot of these people, they found that they were able to sleep in. They found that they had other things in their life. They may have done other forms of exercise to keep themselves healthy and fit and going to the gym, and they found that was more fun. Going for a run was a bit more fun. Being with their friends was a bit more fun than having to get up at 4:30 in the morning and be in the pool at 5 o'clock in the morning. They may have started part-time jobs. There were a lot of part-time jobs, despite what everyone said. A lot of part-time jobs did end up coming. And a lot of young people did get them, packing shelves at Woolworths and Coles and so forth. And all of a sudden they've got money and they've got a bit of, they've got petrol for their car, or they could buy their car, and away they go. Yeah. Not going back to sport. And this is what actually happened. So, it's changed things. Even that 3 or 4 month break has certainly changed things. And we were very lucky here in South Australia, but in Victoria there was the significant breaks,
big lockdowns. Yeah. So it's just going to lose a real. Some sports, I think there'll be some sports like AFL would have lost a lot of people for the first initial hit of COVID, and again in the UK they've had almost an entire year where it's been wiped out. In America, very similar. Lastly, big thing, big question: what would be your ideal man in sport? Essentially, what would that look like?
My ideal man in sport.
What is that? If you're building a man in sport, whether they're a leader, whether they're a young person, what do they look like? What should that person sort of sound like?
The person should have strong morals, strong ethics. And I use the word strong, and even that is all steeped in masculinity, isn't it? Good morals, good ethics. They should be dedicated to their sport. They should be understanding that if they are outstanding and they would be outstanding at their sport, and that would come through work and dedication and skill and all those sorts of things. But they would also need to be understanding that not everyone can be like them. Because not everyone has the same genetics, not everyone has the same work ethic, not everyone has the same psychology, not everyone has the same background, parents, money, socioeconomic status, which all plays into those sorts of things. They should be understanding of all of those sorts of things, and they should promote the involvement and engagement of sport for young people and people in general according to what their goals and desires are. It shouldn't just be a chew them up and spit them out kind of approach. I think there's a lot of sports that certainly have pathways to the Olympics, to the elite level, that do chew them up and spit them out. And then they're often lost to the sport or any sport for quite some years. The elite pathways certainly, while they provide a huge boon to the nation or the state that they're in which they're involved, and possibly to the sport, they need to manage those young people where they're going to, and so the ideal sports person would assist in that.
Yeah, creating a village to raise a child. Absolutely. If you're going to create anything, create that village, create that environment. Mate, thank you so much for your time. This is fascinating. Sure, people can reach out, find you on LinkedIn or at Flinders University if they want to get a hold of you for your research. But yeah, thank you so much for your time. Really, really appreciate it.
No worries. Thanks.